I pretty?
There's a question I know, one that sounds completely harmless, almost charming. 3 simple words. The kind of thing a nervous person might ask before a date, or a teenager might type under a photo late at night. Something so ordinary you'd hear it and barely react. Am I pretty? Now imagine hearing that in the dark, on a quiet street with no one else around, from a stranger whose face you can't quite see, and imagine knowing somehow that no matter how you answer, something terrible is already waiting for you. This is not just a story people tell to scare children, at least not anymore. In Japan, thousands of children claimed they heard this question in 1979. Parents took it seriously. Schools took it seriously. Even police reports were filed. And the strangest part is that the story did not stay in 1979. Kenji was 16. Not especially brave, not especially fearful either. Just the kind of boy who told himself ghost stories were for younger kids and people who wanted excuses for ordinary fear. Every afternoon he took the same route home from school, through the back streets of a small city near Gifu, past an old stone bridge, past a convenience store where his younger sister sometimes waited for him. It was a walk he had done so many times that he barely had to think about it. On a Thursday evening in late October, he was halfway through that familiar route when he saw the woman. She stood beneath a street lamp at the far end of a narrow alley, not walking, not waiting, just standing there with her head slightly tilted, long dark hair resting over her shoulders. She wore a pale coat, the color of old bone, too thin for the cold, and over her face was a white surgical mask. That should have felt ordinary. In Japan, masks were nothing unusual, but something about hers felt wrong. Maybe it was too large, maybe it sat strangely against her face, or maybe it was the stillness, the way she stood there without shifting her weight, without rubbing her hands against the cold, without moving like a real person waiting outside. Kenji slowed down before he even realized he had done it. He told himself he was just being careful. There was no reason to feel afraid. A woman standing in the street was not a threat. To avoid looking at her directly, he pulled out his phone and pretended to be busy, the way people do when they want to disappear without actually disappearing. Then she turned her head and looked directly at him. "Watashi? Kirei?" Her voice was soft, almost gentle. Not the voice of someone demanding attention, but of someone asking for something small, something normal. "Am I pretty?" He knew the question immediately. His mother had told him that story years earlier, the way adults pass certain warnings to children without fully admitting that they themselves still believe them. It had traveled through schoolyards and apartment buildings for generations. At some point, it had stopped feeling like folklore and started feeling like one of those things everyone simply knew. Kuchisake Onna, the slit-mouthed woman. What made the legend so unsettling was how simple it was. She did not haunt one house. She did not belong to one shrine, one cursed object, or one bloodline. She walked. She appeared at night, usually to people who were alone, usually on roads exactly like the one Kenji stood on now. And she asked her question, as if the answer mattered. The older versions of the story stretched back to the Edo period. They spoke of a woman famous for her beauty, and of the husband who destroyed it. Some said he was jealous. Others said he was simply cruel, and cruelty rarely needs a reason. He took a blade and cut her mouth open from corner to corner. She died, and later she returned with the one question she had never been allowed to ask while she was alive. "Am I still pretty?" Kenji answered too quickly. "Yes." It slipped out as a reflex, the kind of answer people give when they want to avoid being rude, the kind of answer that comes before thought. The woman tilted her head the other way. Slowly, she lifted one hand and pulled the mask down. Later, when his family asked what he had seen, Kenji could not describe it properly. Not because it was impossible to describe, but because the image seemed to stick somewhere in his throat. He had seen drawings online. He thought he understood the legend. But knowing an image and seeing it 2 meters in front of you are not the same thing. Her mouth stretched across her face in a long dark scar, split from cheek to cheek. It looked old, healed. That made it worse. If there had been blood, it might have felt like an injury. But there was no blood. Only skin pulled tight and smooth, as if it had once been torn open and then closed badly. She looked at him with the same calm expression. Core demo? Even like this, am I still pretty? Kenji didn't remember deciding to leave. One moment he was standing there, staring at her ruined smile, and the next he was moving down the alley with stiff, unnatural steps. Not quite running, not quite walking. His body seemed to understand something his mind had not yet accepted. His younger sister Hana had been waiting for him at the convenience store. She was 14, practical and impatient in the way younger sisters often are. She had been about to send him a message, asking where he was, when she saw him come around the corner. His face looked drained beneath the white store lights. She asked what happened. He said nothing. He kept saying nothing all the way home. Their mother noticed during dinner. She put her chopsticks down and looked at him carefully, with the expression mothers get when they already know what the answer might be, and still hope they are wrong. Their father barely looked up from his phone. That night, Hana couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the familiar noises of the apartment, the quiet settling of wood and pipes, and thought about the stories that had been spreading at school. A masked woman near the station park. A girl followed home after cram school. A classmate's cousin who saw a tall woman standing under a street lamp and refused to talk about it after. It was probably nothing, just autumn. Just the season when the air cools, the nights stretch longer, and people start looking for reasons to explain the unease they already carry inside them. That was what Hana told herself. Then she looked at the window. The curtain was moving, slightly, gently, even though the window was closed. At school, the incidents began so small that they could have been dismissed on their own. A locker left open that had definitely been locked, a chair scraping across the floor of an empty classroom, heard by a teacher passing in the hallway, a quiet boy named Ryu from the year below Kenji, found sitting alone in the gymnasium at 6 in the morning, staring at the far wall as if waiting for something to appear there. He could not explain how he got in, or what he had been looking at. When Kenji heard about that, he felt a colder kind of fear. Not surprise, recognition. He went to find his homeroom teacher, Matsuda Sensei. She was older, calm, and had spent enough years at the school to know every rumor tied to the building. She wore her reading glasses on a chain around her neck and spoke in the measured tone of someone who never wasted words. Kenji didn't know exactly how to explain what had happened to him, only that he needed to tell someone who might actually listen. She listened. She did not interrupt. She did not smile politely or tell him he had imagined it. She set her glasses down on her desk and watched him with an expression he could not quite read. It was not fear exactly. It was something close to it. The look of a person who has spent a long time hoping a certain thing would never happen, only to realize it finally has. "When did you see her?" she asked. Kenji told her, "Thursday evening, beside the stone bridge." Matsuda Sensei gave a slow nod. "The bridge," she said quietly. She did not explain. Instead, she told him to walk home with friends, never alone, never after dark if he could avoid it. And if a stranger spoke to him, he was not to answer. She said it like a basic safety rule, like reminding someone to lock a door before bed. The next morning, something was found beneath the stone bridge. An old fisherman noticed it first. He sat below the bridge most mornings by the riverbank, the kind of man who knew the town more intimately than the people living in it. Resting neatly against one of the concrete supports was a pair of scissors. They were large, heavy, old-fashioned, the kind of scissors a tailor might have used years earlier. There was no blood, no rust. They had simply been left there, as though placed for someone to find. By mid-morning, everyone at school knew, and suddenly the story had weight. Police arrived that afternoon. There were only 2 officers, one older and one younger, but their presence alone changed the atmosphere. They photographed the scissors, sealed them in an evidence bag, and asked the usual questions. Who found them, when, whether anything like this had happened before. Nobody seemed eager to answer honestly, or maybe nobody knew how. The principal sent a notice home that same day, formal, cold, and carefully worded. A suspicious object had been found near the stone bridge. Students were advised to avoid the area when possible, travel in groups, and be accompanied by an adult. It was written in a way that left no room for the real question. Who put the scissors there? Kenji stared at the notice for a long time. He kept hearing Matsuda-sensei say that one word again. The bridge. And in every version of the legend he had ever heard, there were scissors somewhere near the end, hidden in a bag, concealed beneath a coat, slowly lifted when she didn't like the answer she received. That evening he went home early and took a route 2 streets longer just to avoid passing the bridge again. The official investigation lasted 3 days. On the 4th, the urgency was gone. There had been no blood, no witness, no body, just a pair of scissors beneath a bridge. The case was never exactly closed, but no one behaved as though it was still active. Before leaving town that week, the older officer made an offhand remark to a neighbor. In a small place, that was enough. The word spread the way whispers always spread, and eventually they reached Kenji. The scissors were new, the officer had said. The factory markings were still visible. They had been placed there that same morning. A week later, Hana found the photograph. It was tucked inside a local history book she had borrowed from the library, one she had chosen almost absent-mindedly because it was the last unread book left on the shelf. The photograph was black and white, very old, folded and unfolded so often that a deep crease split it down the middle. It showed a woman standing on a path near what looked like the same stone bridge. Her back faced the camera, her hair hung loose over her shoulders. Hana turned the photograph over. On the back, written in faint pencil, almost too pale to read, were a few words. She asked if I thought she was pretty. I said yes. I walked away. I don't know why I'm still here. There was no name, no date, nothing else. For a long moment, Hana simply stared at it. Then she slid it back into the book, then took it out again, and finally placed it inside her school bag, not because she had decided to, but because some part of her could not bear to leave it behind. The story had changed by then. It no longer felt like school gossip. It felt like something that had happened before, something that had been happening for a very long time. The last incident anyone could confirm happened on a Tuesday night in early November. A third-year student named Tomoko, 17 years old, was found by her parents at the far end of their street just before 11. She was standing completely still, facing away from the house. They called her name. She didn't answer at first. Then slowly she turned around. Her face looked normal, completely untouched. She walked past them, entered the house, went straight to her room, and locked the door. The next morning she came to school as if nothing had happened. When a friend asked if she was okay, Tomoko smiled and said she had just slept badly, but from that day on, she wore a scarf wrapped high around her jaw, even in warm classrooms, even during lunch. She said her throat was bothering her. No one pushed further. People rarely push when they already suspect the answer. 4 days later, the police returned to the school. This time, only the older officer came. He spent 40 minutes in the principal's office. Then Matsuda-sensei was called in. She remained there for 20 minutes. When she came back out, her face was unreadable. But she was not wearing her glasses, the ones she always wore, the ones she kept hanging around her neck. Kenji heard that detail later in the hallway, passed from one student to another, and it unsettled him more than anything official ever did. It was such a small thing, but people only forget familiar objects when something has disturbed the shape of the day. That same afternoon, a detective came to the school. The word felt too large for a town like theirs, but this man was different from the officers who had come before. He wore plain clothes, carried a notebook, and asked questions in a way that made it clear he was not trying to calm anyone down. He spoke to several students. Kenji was one of them. The detective asked about the woman, where she had stood, what time Kenji had seen her, how long she remained there, which direction she went. Kenji answered each question as carefully as he could. Then the detective paused. "Did you see the scissors?" he asked. Kenji said no. He hadn't even noticed whether she was holding anything. The detective nodded slowly, closed his notebook, and stood up. He was already at the door when he stopped and turned back. "Someone else reported seeing her before you," he said. "At the same corner, in August, a female student. We received the report, but we didn't take it seriously." He paused. That was a mistake. Then he left. Kenji never learned more than that. The investigation continued in the background, at least officially, but no arrests were made. No real statement was ever given. Weeks later, a small notice appeared in the local paper saying that residents should remain alert after reports of a suspicious woman in the area. One paragraph. Page 2. Then life kept moving, because that is what life does, even when something has shifted underneath it. Kenji never saw the woman again. Not that year, not the year after. He graduated, moved to Osaka for university, found work, bought a small apartment with thin walls and a view of a parking structure, and slowly stopped thinking about that autumn, the way people stop thinking about most things from childhood. Not all at once, just little by little. But some things remained. He never walked alone at night without watching the street ahead of him. He never passed a woman in a surgical mask without feeling something cold settle briefly in his chest. And whenever he heard the words, "Am I pretty?" even as a joke, even in a harmless voice, something in him tightened. That is the real reason this story survived. Not because of a ghost, not because of old folklore, or the Edo period, or the details people argue about. It survived because the trap is so simple. A normal question, a familiar voice, an ordinary street. And then the world shifts by 1 degree, just enough that nothing ever feels fully safe again. According to the story, the masked woman is still out there, still asking, still waiting. And somewhere, maybe tonight, someone is about to hear that question and answer. Before they have time to think, by the time they realize there was never a safe answer, it will already be too late.